Hey guys, just a little bit of an intro here. If you want to get straight to the commentary, there will be a timestamp below and you can skip this, but I did hesitate for a while in making this video. I was kind of debating on how I wanted to do it, and I really couldn't figure out a good format that I liked in order to make these sort of matchup guide videos. In the end, I opted for what is the simplest on my end, which ended up being me just sort of commentating over a game in which there was a lot of back and forth, and just me sort of noting the things that I think are important. It ended up being pretty long, almost 20 minutes, and I know it can be pretty disjointed what I'm saying, and also probably feel a lot like rambling, but I really wanted to get something out there just so that I can move on to some other compositions that I struggle with as Feral Disc. So take everything I say here with a grain of salt. I'm in no way the best at Feral Druid, so if you have any sort of comments or strats or constructive feedback about the strats, you feel free to leave them below. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the commentary. Alright, so with Warrior Holy Paladin, there's a lot to go over, and I don't want this video to drag on forever, so I'm not going to cover everything, but I think one of the most important things to cover in any matchup is what is it that they want to do, and what is it that you want to do. So first, let's look at what our win conditions are as the Disc Feral, and usually what that's going to be is killing the warrior by setting up the kill through getting big bleeds on them, and then either CCing the paladin, zoning the paladin, or ooming the paladin. That's like the most common way in which you'll win. But when you look at the flip side and you look at the Warrior Holy Paladin win con, theirs is much more straightforward and also more one-dimensional in that they're just going to send the warrior at your priest and try to kill your priest. Now, the reason this is important is because in a vacuum, if you were to have the warrior just kind of go full PvE DPS on your priest and you go full PvE DPS on the warrior, their win con will happen before yours will, right? Like the warrior will kill the priest before you can kill the warrior. So in that regard, they're initially the aggressors and you want to be defensive. I'd say the biggest change that I made in my approach to this matchup that helped me a bunch was by playing more aggressive, more defensive, focusing less on setting up our win con and more on preventing theirs. So it's really important to, when you're looking at the enemy, to think about what are the things that they can do to affect your gameplay. And one of the nice things about Warrior Holy Paladin as a Feral Druid is there's not much that they can do to affect you. So first and most importantly, they cannot dispel your instant cast procs, right? So this is really nice because it just means that you can get full clones, full heals, full entangling roots, whatever you want. Whenever you get the instant cast proc, you can basically do whatever you want with it. On top of that, they don't have great CC for you. The warrior has Intimidating Shout, and you can berserk out of that, and then the paladin has Hammer of Justice, which most of the time he'll be using on your priest or he'll be too far out of range. So that being said, I think always starting playing the match from a defensive standpoint and focusing on not letting them reach sort of the criteria to set up their kill is your first and foremost priority. That being said, a good metric that I like to stick around is if the warrior has Bladestorm, try to not let your priest get to 50% health. If the warrior has Bladestorm and your priest is at 50% health, usually what they'll do is they'll Bladestorm, your priest will then, he'll come out of the Bladestorm and your priest will be at in execute range, and then he'll just execute your priest and you'll kind of just be screwed. So playing defensively around that, always trying to make sure that your priest has enough breathing room to keep their health pool up, and really playing aggressively in between the blade storms is what you want to do. So right here, this team is a great example of them going kind of all in early. They popped their orc racial, they popped the blade storm. We got both their trinkets. At this point, they've really kind of expended their go. So during that go, I like to play pretty defensive, but once we come out of this, I think as soon as we recover. So my priest is getting a little trucked here. So I'm going to pop some more, try to pop some CC here. This guy is getting these reflex, shield reflect on me, but I'm honestly not too concerned, because even though I'm just hard casting clones and getting reflected, he's eventually going to run out of ways to stop me at range, and he'll either have to waste a charge, come into melee and pummel me, or the paladin will have to waste his hammer of justice. They'll have to do something to interrupt these clones. So I'm just going to keep threatening a full clone on them and basically making them stop me, because they're not doing too much damage during that time anyway. But they finally didn't stop me, and so I get the full clone off. The MS drops, so I hit my priest with some heals, and now we're at a point where we can swap to being aggressive. One thing to note here is that personally I would have loved to just innervate right now. When it comes to the mana battle, their only real mana regen that they have is Divine Plea. The paladin can also go drink, which is easier for them than it is for us, because their warrior can survive by themselves for so long. But the big thing to look out for by the paladin is their Divine Plea for their mana regen, and then for us as the Disferal, we have Innervate and Shadow Fiend. So when it comes to Innervate, because they have no Dispel, it's best to use it very early on. Get that cooldown rolling, because like I said, our default playstyle in this matchup is going to be defensive and stalling it out. The idea here is to sort of get all of their longer cooldowns, shield wall, retaliation, get out the divine sack, the blessing of protection, all those things. Get the paladin's bubble. You have to sort of whittle away at all of their cooldowns, and then eventually they won't have anything, and you can keep playing aggressively at them, and they'll just sort of run out of steam. One more note to make, especially about whether you're playing defensive or aggressively, is positioning. Your priest, because everything starts with the warrior getting on your priest, it's all a chain reaction of where your priest plays. So if you need to be more defensive, if the blade storm is off cooldown, you're taking a ton of damage, like your priest is taking a ton of damage, what they want to do is pull the warrior away and out of line of sight of the paladin. If, on the flip side of that, the blade storm is not off cooldown and your priest has a lot of health, they want to run at the paladin, and what you want to be doing is maiming the paladin. You can even clone the paladin to just stop them, and you'll set up some burns. An important thing to note about mana burning the paladin, and again to re-emphasize playstyles of aggressive versus defensive, is if you are too aggressive with the mana burn, if the priest is, let's say they're in a good position and they start to cast a mana burn on the paladin, if the warrior hits them with the overpower and puts up the unrelenting assault debuff, which lowers their healing by 50%, and it stacks with Mortal Strike, that will mean that not only was your priest not topping themselves being defensive because they're casting the mana burn, but once they come out of that mana burn, they're not going to have a lot of healing output, and it can be a huge swing in the warrior Holy Paladin's favor to kind of push them over to now being extremely aggressive again, because you're Your priest was wasting some time doing the mana burn, and they get knocked down to 80% health. And then on top of that, now their healing is reduced by 75% health, and the warrior pops recklessness or something, and even without Blade Storm, your priest just dies. So when it comes to mana burning, it's also something that you want to be extremely cautious about, just because of the Unrelenting Assault debuff. So you'll see here right now what we're doing is, because we have the warrior's trinket, I'm just kind of CCing the warrior, and we're applying a ton of pressure on the paladin. So right there, my priest could be casting master spells because this guy's sitting in a full clone, and we're going. I just now hit my enervate on my priest, and you'll see that later in this game, the fact that I stalled this out for 15-20 seconds was kind of pretty bad, because it almost cost us. Again, I think the idea with the innervate is you want to be popping it early and often. Obviously, you don't want to be burning any mana if they're super full, but try to utilize your innervates extremely early to just stay up in the mana game. So right here is another really important part of the game. Because we got the Paladin's bubble when I berserked there, it means now when my priest fear, he doesn't have any answer, right? There's two ways they can get out of the fear. It's either the trinket or the bubble. And so once we get both of those things, if my priest gets in close enough and lands a fear, the paladin has to sit the full fear. And that is really good positioning wise, because most of the time the paladin will just sit on the tomb and they won't let my priest get any sort of mana burns. But now that he is completely out of position from the fear, you'll see we're just going to absolutely demolish his mana. So right here, because the paladin, which is, as I say, the wheelchair class, because they have no movement speed, is out in the open, my job is to help set up the mana burns from my priest, which means that what I really need to do is stop the warrior from interrupting or applying pressure. So since the warrior has no trinket, I hit him with the maim, I hit him with the full clone, and now my priest can simply, you can see these mana burn casts up here. He casts like 3 or 4 mana burns, and the paladin's just completely At this point, the paladin is kiting into this room. I hit the paladin with the clone, and I swap to the warrior because I see the recklessness go out. The warrior is using this recklessness kind of defensively, which is good for us, but at the same time, I don't know if I for sure had to peel here. I don't think it's a bad play, but you'll see we kind of let the paladin do what he wants in the next 20 seconds or so. The warrior spins. Again, these are kind of, he's using his offense as counter pressure in order to get us off of his paladin, and it did kind of work. He's using his enrage regeneration, he's using his shield wall, he's using shield block, so we're really not going to kill him. And then at this moment, I noticed the paladin, I kind of lost track of the paladin, which was not good, and he's going to plea, and he's going to get some drinking off. So one thing to note that is good to use in Warrior HPAL is if the Holy Paladin is in a position where he really doesn't want to peek or like come out of line of sight, what you can do is pop an Entangling Roots on the warrior, and that will force either the warriors, either they sit a full root, they use their trinket, or the paladin will have to come out to dispel them. So you do want to be using Entangling Roots if you're chasing the paladin. If you're in the aggressive position, just be popping Entangling Roots on the warrior so that he can't chase you guys as well, or the paladin has to sort of double back to free him. But anyway, the paladin, he got his basically full mana off that drink. It was a pretty big misplay for us to leave him out there. But even then, even with that, because we still have the Shadow Fiend, and the warrior did use his spin, his shield wall, his shield block, all right there to sort of save the paladin while drinking. Like, that's how he kind of stopped us from getting on the paladin. We're still in a decent position just due to how many cooldowns they pumped into him. And the paladin has no bubble. His trinket is back off of CD, but that's not too big of a deal from our perspective. So right here, I'm still just sitting on the Paladin right there, I probably could have just full cloned the Paladin and got back on the Warrior. Now that the Warrior shield wall is gone, I think that should definitely be the play. Like, it also, as I mentioned before, me sitting on the Warrior is the better defensive play. So not only is it good offensively for our win con, but it also help slow down the aggressiveness from them and slow down their ability to reach their win con. So I probably should have swapped the Warrior a little earlier, but I do anyway right here. The Paladin is at a decent amount of mana, and see right here, this is a decent plea from him. You see we're still in the aggressive spot right now. My priest is kind of running at him, but we're not like too far off as far as like mana goes. My priest is not in a comfortable amount of health, and their mana is a little low. So at this point, what we're trying to look for is, one, our next innervate's not for another minute. So we have a while on the mana front, and their Blade Storm's coming back up. So our goal here is to kind of try to live until the next innervate, and also my next Berserk is coming back up. Because now what we're reaching is the point of the fight where they've used all of their like 4-minute cooldowns, 5-minute cooldowns, and they've even double used, like Divine Sack, this is the second time he used it. They've double used some of their shorter cooldowns, and you're coming back up on your 3-minute cooldowns of Berserk and Innervate, and you're going to use that swing to sort of close it out while they're down a couple cooldowns. So he gets another spin, but this guy's spins haven't been threatening all game because we've been keeping up a high amount of health. The Paladin really wants to get away there to try to set up some more drinks. He's only at 2.4k health, and now he knows. Before, he could run away and just leave his Warrior because the Warrior had shield wall. But now the Warrior can't be as sort of solo like sustainable by himself. Basically, the Warrior can't be by himself for so long because he doesn't have shield wall. So the Paladin now has to stay much closer, and he's not really going to get that drink off or anything of that nature. He also probably won't get a good plea because my priest, even though my priest is super he's still threatening the plea dispel. Like, he could just dispel the plea on that guy, and we also know that my innervate's coming back up in 8 seconds. So this is really a bit of a stall game right now, just trying to make it. This guy even pops shield block, which is fine with us because, again, we're stalling out because our innervate is going to be better than his plea. So I instantly innervate. I've got my Berserk rolling. I hit the Paladin in a clone. One little interaction here to know about is if the Paladin is in his plea and you clone him, he won't regenerate any mana during that plea. So he has no trinket, which means this is guaranteed full clone, which means out of that 9 seconds of that plea, he's going to miss, the vast majority of that. So that clone not only prevents him from healing the Warrior, but it also ruins his mana regen. And now you see we're at 6k mana and he's at 1k mana. I still have some of my Zerk up. I've got a big rip on the Warrior. He does use his last defensive, which was the Hand of Protection, to sort of clean off that rip, but it doesn't really matter here. I just have way too much pressure and damage. We've gone through all their cooldowns. My priest is free reign to do whatever he wants. He's running right at the Paladin. The Paladin is super The Warrior's sitting here trying to parry and dodge by facing me, but it's just not enough. My priest pulls out a Holy Fire and we kill him. So yeah, I'd say the biggest thing here is just to know when you want to be aggressive and when you want to be defensive. Make sure your priest's positioning is playing off of that, and then just make sure you're watching all their cooldowns. Once you get rid of all their cooldowns, you can really play a lot more aggressive and the game's a lot easier. So just play defensive until then and you got it. Oh, and one last thing that I realized I forgot to mention was just how important the priest dispelling the sacred shield buff on the warrior really is. It's the number one way that your priest can help you be aggressive. The downside to it, besides of course just using globals, is that it can be a little mana intensive. What we like to do is really focus on it hard early without using any sort of offensive or defensive cooldowns from ourselves, just focus on dispelling it. And then what that will do is it'll operate a little bit like a mana dump for your priest, and that'll help you get that early innervate going, so that you can kind of get that innervate, that second innervate, even earlier. What it also does is it applies pressure on the HPOW war without you using any cooldowns. If you look at this game right here, I haven't used my Berserk, we haven't used the pain suppression, we haven't really used anything yet, and yet they've already used the Paladin's trinket, they use the shield block. Right here I clone the warrior, he uses his trinket, I then bash the warrior, and the Paladin uses Hand of Protection. So they're using a bunch of cooldowns here. They just use the rocket on the priest, and the warrior's gonna spin right here. And then during this spin, I'm just gonna Zerk, and then I'm gonna kill the warrior while I throw the Paladin into full clones. But that's kind of the power of getting those early dispels and using that mana dump. You see my priest is about 2k below the Paladin, but that doesn't matter because they've just committed way too much, way too early. You see right there that my priest instantly dispels that sacred shield, and what happens is I get a big hit on the warrior, and I half clone the priest, sorry, their Paladin, and he dies. So just have your priest, especially early on when there's not as much pressure, focus on keeping that sacred shield off the warrior. Don't worry about his mana early on, just use your innervate to sustain it, and then later on in the game you can kind of worry about mana management. But that's it for Warrior Paladin here. If you guys have any other comps that you would like to see next, go ahead and put them in the comments. If you have any feedback on this or any strategy differences that you like to make when facing Warrior Paladin, you can put those in the comments as well, and I'll see you in the next one.